All right, so welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Diana. Let's get started with where you're from.
Well, I currently reside in Cudworth and I've been here almost 21 years. I am from my hometown of Plenty, Saskatchewan, and
Mm,
I grew up on a farm.
amazing. Okay. And so in this podcast, we talk about pain to power. It's really a rags to riches. What did you do that brought you to what you do now? So let's start a little bit with what your story is, your background, and kind of where the start was.
Well, I was born the youngest of four kids. We had a calving season, we called it, because it was every 2 years, almost to the day, there was a kid born. And so I pulled up the tail end of that. When I was 9 months old, my mom was diagnosed with a rare brain atrophy, where her brain was shrinking. So she ended up having to go into full-time care when I was between 6 and 7 years old. My
Mm,
dad was a farmer, and in order to cope, I'm pretty sure from lots of childhood trauma compounded with his current situation, took to using alcohol as his vice, which lots of rural Saskatchewan people seem to have an issue with.
mhm.
So my oldest brother, Aaron, and we kind of pulled together and got things done. My other brother, Chris, so Chris and Aaron worked a lot on the farm. My sister and I took care of the house quite a bit. When my mom was home, when I was very young, there were caregivers that came into the house. They were there for her, but a lot of them were really good to us as well. I didn't understand what was happening with my mom. I didn't bond with her in the way that I'm bonded with my own daughters, just because simply she couldn't talk anymore. She couldn't walk anymore. She had to be fed. So I remember feeding her. Everything had to be pureed and then fed through a syringe. Um, she didn't remember who I was. When she was able to talk a little bit, my dad would point out all the kids, and she always called me Erin, which, as a little girl that was a little farm kid that wore all her brother's hand-me-downs, I really didn't like being called a boy, which happened a few times as a kid from random strangers or Santa. So it was right out of the gate, it was difficult. When I
Right.
left home when I was 18, I went straight to the self-help section of, I believe it was Kohl's then. And I watched a lot of Oprah at home because on the farm, my dad treated the girls differently than the boys. The boys were allowed a freedom that we didn't get to have. So I spent a lot of time at home watching some Oprah and going and getting those books. And kind of that was my first little, I guess, curiosity moment where I thought, there's got to be something more. I went
Mhm.
to college. I did not pass. I was not ready for life. And I wrote a book. And so if you read chapter 23, you'll know what happens in those later teen years, early 20s. And then I had another family member, a sibling, get sick with the same illness that my mom had, became incapacitated in the same way. And my mom lived for 27 years with this illness. The majority of that time was spent in a hospital, just bedridden in Crawford. And then my sibling, I ended up taking care of when I had my two young babies who are twins. And I ended up having to put her into care. So it was a lot. And I look at my
No
own girls
kidding.
who are just, on the cusp of turning 20, and I'm watching them live life like a 20-year-old should. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful to see.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
is a lot to take in. And I'm a person who has gone through a disease and then had to take care of somebody with a disease. So I understand what that feels like. Did it bring up a lot for you? I'm sure that it was really difficult to do again, be the caregiver.
Um, right. So there was a couple things here. When I was a kid, I don't have memories of my mom well,
Mm.
but my sister and I were thick as thieves, right?
Close.
you have that whole love-hate thing with a sibling, but when things hit the fan, and because we were left alone a lot of the time as kids because our dad was at the bar or out partying, we ended up feeling like that really tight sibling bond slash trauma bond. And it's
Yeah.
been complex as adults to navigate through the trauma. Everybody's at their own stage of their trauma journey where they're working through it or they're not, or they're, you know. So with my sister, I felt a deep sense of obligation. I was also the only girl in the family not to get sick. So there was that added, I don't know if it was pressure, but it was guilt for sure. That survivor's guilt that just said, like, why me? Why am I healthy? Why didn't I get sick? But I've done a
Mhm.
lot of deep diving into trauma research and the way you talk to yourself, right? Like big fan of Joe Dispenza, Gabor Mate. I've done all the deep dive into all of those sorts of books. And I remember something very distinct from when we were kids. Everybody said my sister was just like my mom, and nobody said that about me. And as a kid, I was a little annoyed. I'm like, come on, like, and they're like, you look like your dad. At the end of the day, I ended up looking more like my mom with her face shape and features. And I'm like, okay, what's this about? So then in listening and doing all the learning through that journey, I'm like, they told her and she created a belief system. And that belief system comes to fruition. So it's been very interesting and it's helped alleviate some of that survivor's guilt that I had. It was at one of my closest friends, I think my 30th birthday party, and she's like, you have survivor's guilt. And I'm like, I hadn't really thought of it. I hadn't explored that, but overcoming it has been quite a journey that I had
Mm.
to unpack a lot from being a kid and even a young, 20 something year old taking care of my sister and trying to do everything. Like there was no name for this illness. My mom died when I was 27, so my girls were just about one. And the night my mom died, my daughters were walking. So it
Wow.
was like a sign, right? And I always had an innate feeling inside me that there was more to life. And I followed that. I got curious about that. And that was what I kind of held on to in those really profound, deep, difficult moments of life. It's like, there's something here. So that's when I explored kind of the writing end. I'd always used writing as a kid. I had this orange binder. I think I still have it in my basement. And that was kind of my journal. Like I could dump whatever I needed into there because I wasn't going to dump it on my siblings. A lot of my friends didn't understand. They were complaining about their mom. And so I worked through a lot of my emotions through my writing process. And then I published my first book in 2022. My second book will be coming out in the next couple months. It's a continuation to book one. I did two books because
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I did two books because it felt like there was a lot to unpack and I really wanted to develop the story. And I've read books where they're, the overcoming the trauma and they talk a lot about what happened. I wanted to put in some stories that weren't going to depress everybody. Like, so some fun ones where we're playing don't touch ground in the far off the farm equipment from jumping from one to another and just some like rural Saskatchewan farm kid fun. And that kind of helps break up those really difficult moments. And so they're strategically placed so that you can feel those emotions and then it takes you to, okay, I can breathe for a minute, right? So
Right.
so yeah, it essentially that, as you walk through your journey, you do have an imprint of the trauma and there's always really good lessons in that. And so that's what I've taken and chosen to follow is those lessons. And it's a really good reminder that, I was gifted my health. And yes, that is 100% first prize because if you're healthy, you can do a lot more things and you can help. And because of the way I was raised, I was a helper. I helped my dad, right? And then I helped my siblings. And then I had my own family and I was a helper, but I needed to help me. So deep diving into that at about 40 years old made a profound shift in where I am today at 46.
Wow. Unreal. So beautiful. And I love how, it's this transition from you put the mask on everyone else to finally, at 40, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna try putting it on myself first and see what this is like.
It's an uncomfortable moment, but and sometimes like I uprooted myself from a previous job that I had been at for like 6.5 years. And I walked into another job that was, it felt like it was too big for me. So I had to work through that. And in the process, I would take my lunch breaks and I filled up three big, thick notebooks of just dumping everything out, sorting out who I was. Sometimes I closed the office because I worked by myself. So when you're alone, it's like there's no one else to look at but you, right?
Yeah.
And where I work is about a half an hour drive. So I would spend that time listening to audiobooks or podcasts. And I still do to today. Like I love doing that because I feel like there's so much knowledge out there that we have access to now in the day of internet, podcasts like this. It's just there's so many people who have overcome, and I wanted to really overcome my pain that I was carrying around. Like I didn't even realize it was a backpack, and that backpack I unpacked on everybody else. But it's like maybe I needed to sort through that and what I need to keep, what I need to let go of, and what I need to honor. Like there's a process to the whole thing. So once I started diving into all of that, I felt confident enough to release my first book, which had
Hmm.
been sitting there for 25 plus years in kind of a raw format. And now with the second book, I'm just as scared to release it. Like this one, Silently Said, a journey through illness and addiction. This made it to #1 on Amazon. And I was shocked, and people were reaching out. And then I started doing keynotes and going to the schools, and that lit me up like I've never been lit up before. And it was just for me, but sharing that with others. And then the conversations, the vulnerability that people share after the talk when I'm, signing their books or they're buying, they just dump a lot of stuff on me. And I don't take it home. I take that and hold space for them. And I guess my journal was me holding space for myself. It's a beautiful process and it's
Yeah.
very vulnerable. But as Brene Brown says, like there's vulnerability is strength. So I've learned a lot. As a kid, we weren't allowed to have our emotions. It was very much when my grandma, who was one of my best friends as a kid, when she died when I was in grade 3, my dad looked at me at her funeral and said, "Don't you cry." And so tears weren't allowed. Mom would go back. We would bring her out on a day pass. Mom would go back to the hospital and I would want to cry. And he's like, if you cry, your mom will cry. We would go see her and, how many nights a week. And he's like, you can't cry. Whatever you do, don't upset your mom. And so it really detached me as a child from my own emotions without realizing it. So it was interesting, like a farmer in the 80s, he had a lot of pressure, and in the
Yeah.
90s, like those were hard farming years, and recovering from the droughts and the financial stress. It was a lot, and I have a lot of empathy for him. He's passed on now. He died of alcoholism at 73. You could never,
Mhm.
like, I had a very strained relationship with him for a long time, but then I ended up kind of putting it to rest once I started going into the journey of detaching my identity and worth from his, because we're always treating people at the level that we love ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really well said. and such a difficult journey. I think parents are they're a really tough one to release and set separately from yourself, because at one point in your life, they were everything, right? And so to learn and to teach yourself that this human being is just a human being doing the best they can with what they have, and that may not have been correct for you, is a difficult journey to go through, but a very admirable one. And I'm sure that that gave you a great deal of peace.
Yeah, it was complicated because, I would have conversations with my mom and she could never talk to me back. And
Mhm.
so then I started exploring what is it I'm feeling when I'm with her. So
Mm.
it's like I knew when she was dying. It was my first day back to work after my maternity leave, which I took 10 months off. And I get a call and she's not doing well. So, and I just knew, right? And when my sister was passing, I knew. And when my
Yeah,
brother called and said dad had died, he hadn't even said it. I said, Dad's gone, right? So it really honed in me this ability to like just know. So it's more like the biggest lessons I learned from nonverbal people is you don't need words to communicate. It's ironic because I'm a writer, a speaker, and that's what I rely on, but that's to pass the message over. And the connection that the
right.
audience feels is that authenticity that Brene talks about, where it's like, if you are vulnerable and you are authentic, the audience will connect, people will feel that. And that is where I was with my mom. So I could dump on her all of the things that were worrying me without expecting her to talk back. But it was that soul energy where we were able to share, and same with
Mhm.
my sister, that really created a space for me to kind of explore that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, okay, so your book, I love it's first of all, it's extraordinary. Number one bestseller. Congratulations. That's phenomenal. I'm sure that the second one is going to do so well as well. What did you, how did that come to, like, what started the idea of it's been 25 years, you've loved this is something that's meant a lot to you. What kickstarted it back up?
Um, in 2018, my dad passed away. And it was 2 weeks before he died, we had a conversation on the phone. And I had written something really nice for him when he turned 70 about being daddy's girl, because I spent a lot of time in the shop and in the combine, grain truck, all of the things. I was my only parent that was active, so I was daddy's
Right.
girl. And I held back for a long time because I knew what I was going to write was going to hurt him. And in
Mm,
2018, he said to me, "You have to publish that book." And for a long time, he was worried about how he would be portrayed. And I get it. I think I would be too if I were him.
mhm,
But he said, "You have a gift and it's meant to be shared." And that was our last conversation. So it was like I needed that final blessing. I know there's a lot of people that want to write their memoir that say, my kids can't know about what happened. My parents would be devastated if they read it. And I get that. We want to honor and respect the people that we are the closest with, relational wise. But I had to overcome, I think, a lot of my own doubt. And so starting that process when I turned 40, and then 4 years in becoming brave enough to be like, okay, it's done. And as a writer, you never quite feel like your work is done. You never quite feel like it's good enough. And
yeah.
so the feedback that I was getting in emails and text messages was, it surprised me. It was like I devoured that book in less than 24 hours. I couldn't put it down. That was a big theme. And I'm like, really? And I lived it, and allowing that book to go out in publication allowed me to let it go. I
Mhm.
keep the lessons, And I love little Diana now. Like little Diana, I always thought I was like, I even told myself till I left my last workplace that I was too much personality for people. I talk too
Mm.
much, all of these things. I had this tape in my head, and I always found, like, I don't know if you find this, but I always found people to validate it. It started with my dad, it moved into certain friendships, moved into certain colleagues. They would always reiterate my belief system. And I was like, yeah, I'm
Mm.
like, they say I don't do this and I'm not good at that. And I, all of these things. And it wasn't until I started peeling back those faces that were currently with me and found that root of it being my dad, trying to have me conform into something that was easier for him to manage. Because if
Right.
you compare
Yeah.
my sister and I, she was quiet, extremely suppressed. When she would let that suppression out, it was usually directed at me, and it was aggressive.
Right.
And whereas you always knew where I was at emotionally every single
Mm-hmm.
day. I showed up as Diana. And even though my dad, it was hard for him to manage, like he grew up with the mentality that women are in the kitchen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you are here to cater and serve us boys, and go marry someone rich.
Right.
Those were the core values that I was instilled with. And then I'm thinking, he got me. And I blazed my own trail and I think
Yeah, you did.
I think I used those things instead of a belief system. Some of them I was like, I flipped that over and I stepped on that stool and I used it to level up, right? So I am in local government by day. I am a CAO of a municipality, which is a big job. I also think that most of us who are in this sort of municipal career have to have some sort of childhood trauma because it is chaos or
Yeah.
organized chaos to a point. But I was like, why did I choose this career? Well, because it's constantly stimulating my fight or flight response. And I lived in fight or flight. So this was quite normal. But now in my current position at my current municipality, I can go into that and I can dip my toes into it and I can still remain calm because I started doing a lot of meditating and I can think clearer because I let go of a lot of what happens. So when I walk into a situation which is crazy, I'm like, okay, let's sort this out. We just need to
We
unpack.
can do this.
We can do this. I still have some emotional reactions that are a little bit um, too much for my own liking, but I generally walk in with a little more rational calm instead of looking at a situation and panicking or going into the full flight or fight response. Like I worked with a colleague for a number of years that would say to me, if they do this at work, then you're going to lose your job. So that's fear, right? And now I walk in and I'm like, I still mostly work by myself. I did hire an assistant for 1 day a week. She's fantastic. I didn't know that I didn't have to shoulder it all because as a kid, you shouldered
Mm.
it all. So then you become the adult that shoulders it all and tries to fix everything for everyone. But now I take a step back and I'm like, sometimes people need to learn their lessons and you can be there to hold their umbrella, but you can't fix it. You can't stop that rain. I reposted something on my Facebook just last night and it resonated. I was like, yeah, I can hold an umbrella and be behind and I got your back. But you know what? That rain is necessary for your seed to crack open and for you to grow. So I'm not going to
Well
stop the
said.
rain for you. I am going to sit with you in the rain.
Mm. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Very poetic and definitely from a writer. One thing I'm really loving listening to you is that, as much as this podcast is very much like a rags to riches when you say like, you had something and then you wrote a book and then you stood on stages and you changed the world. What I'm really seeing to be, although you have that too, something that has been hugely your version of riches is your ability to no longer be the adult child that, that you once were, but to instead just be Anna, and allow other people to help you, and allow yourself to be big and bold and bright. And I think that those riches have so much more tangibility. There's so much more joy in those riches than there is like in necessarily, for example, yes, you wrote a book, that's extraordinary. Yes, you stand on stages, that's extraordinary. But you have a light about you, and I think that can be sometimes the consolation prize, that it's just so much more valuable.
Thank you. It took a long time to find the light. I always let everybody dim the light, but then I found the
Yeah.
switch. And now it's like if I turn on my light, that can spread out to other people, which is the point, right? That's the point of the pain. And that's where book two, Silence Breaks a Journey Home, it's heavy. And I get, how come it's not out yet? How come it's not out yet? And there's been a pre-sale, and I get that and I respect that. But when I dive back into those really heavy times, because book one ends at the age of 25.
Mm.
My sister's sick. You
Hmm.
don't know how I'm going to handle it. I don't have a family yet of my own. And then book two, I think there's between 12 and 15 people that are close to me that pass away, three of them being immediate family members. So
Unreal.
now I'm left with my two brothers and myself and a family of six, right? So going back to those places is a big ask of myself.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the beautiful part of it's called a journey home, right? Like Silence Breaks, Silently Said. I'll explain this title because this one is about all the like my mom was a big teacher and said nothing,
Mm.
right? Silence Breaks a Journey Home is kind of a play on words for two reasons. So I'm breaking in book two. So this silence of, that unspoken how you are supposed to be is breaking me. And then a journey home is twofold. The first part being a lot of souls pass on to the home, and then I find my own home in me. So, and I'm hoping to do a third book too, where I compile
Mhm.
all the lessons and kind of make it into like a true self-help. Like, how did I get to where I am? And like, I don't think it'll be a step-by-step guide, but it'll take tidbits from different points in my journey and how I overcame. And the first thing you have to do is make that decision to overcome.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's the hardest part. And you said something so profound that made me go, oh boy, that was a tough one for me, asking for help.
Mm.
Right? Because when we were kids, social services would come into our house. And my dad would always preface it with, if we don't pass, you're being taken away. Nobody's going to take four kids. So you better be quiet. Everything's good here. And as much as it was good here, even though sometimes the power was cut off, the phone was cut off, there was no hot water, there was no food, I guess we all understood that it would be far worse if we were taken away because we wouldn't have each other. And that was the glue that held all of us together to get through it.
Right.
So, like understanding that you could ask for help, that was a foreign concept to me. There
Mhm.
was some sort of weird little unspoken badge of honor as a new mom, married to a great man. He worked full time. I was at home with the kids. My beautiful aunt, my mom's sister, and I became super close. We're still close to today. She came for a week, but I had this knowing that I thought, you can't ask for help. And you got these
Mm.
two babies, and you put them in the crib because they're crying, and you go to your room and you cry and you're overwhelmed, and then you're dealing with your sick sister and trying to get a name for the illness because your mom just died, and you're just like, it was chaos. So the help that I asked
Absolutely.
for at 40, I went to a self-help event that Corliss Rousseau, I don't know if you're familiar with her, she had put on in Saskatoon at the Willows. And it again ignited some curiosity in healing myself and finding purpose. And then I went into her master class, and during that time my dad died. So it was like, oh boy, like, and we had just lost two of our best friends. One died of cancer, and her husband was found dead on his acreage 7 weeks later. But it was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, and we never got answers as to really what happened. So there was a lot in like 5 months. So I kind of
Mhm.
broke, and there was no choice but to unpack and find purpose. And when I could do a deep dive and get curious about myself, that allowed me to ask for help in a different way. And my asking permission of myself, being like, you don't have to do this all on your own. So then I would, you always have your friends. The friends groups of my 20s were like, are you wearing the right clothes? Are you hanging out with the right people? Let's go have drinks, like all of that. And
Yeah.
in my 30s, I started reading Eckhart Tolle's work. I don't know if you've,
Oh,
oh,
love.
so A New Earth, I think I read about 5 times. My version is so tattered, and there's highlighter marks and there's sticky notes. And I went through Oprah's classes that she had that 6-part series with all his lessons. And I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden, the friends that were more superficial started falling away and more status
Mhm.
based. And I started developing these beautiful friendships where I found safety, because I think
Wow.
the very biggest root that I needed to pull in my own self was that I wasn't safe.
Mm.
I wasn't safe with others, because the people that were to provide me safety as a child,
Yeah.
they didn't. And I don't blame them. I'm not mad. And it's
Mhm.
ironic because it takes a lot to get to that place where you don't blame them. I used to say in my early 20s, if you don't like your kids, look at yourself. And now
True.
I'm like, where my dad was at emotionally, it's actually pretty amazing that he was able to keep all of us under the same roof,
Yeah.
afford the eyeglasses when there was no
Mhm.
money. He had to pay for my mom's care. And after I published the book, so many people in my hometown were feeling guilty. And a lot of them reached out to me. They're like, we didn't realize it was that bad. We knew it wasn't great, but we didn't realize. And I was like, we didn't want you to know. I
Yeah.
mean, there was a few of you that did know that made the call to social services. So then
Mhm.
you didn't trust, right? So it was a whole process of growing. And then I grew these children of my own. Oh my goodness. They have been one of the biggest learnings and one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to heal, because I watch them in the world now and I'm just like, go get it. Go get it.
Mm.
I'll always have your back. Your dad and
Mm.
I will be there for you. And being able to support them in a way that I didn't have, I think that's that it, they talk about the intergenerational trauma. And like my dad was protected by his mom, and his dad and him had a very difficult relationship. So it was like he had two sides, and he was spoiled by his mom. So it was
Mm.
always he could get away with things. And
Right.
then he parented, and nobody was getting away with anything. So he took after more like his dad.
Right.
And I parented, and I see even now it shifts when your kids move out. And like you said, the adult relationship with your children is really complicated, or complex, can be complex, because you
Mhm.
are their primary role. And my primary role, or my parents' primary role, was very absent.
Mhm.
So we became our own parents. And I never had a deep desire to have children, which I found
Mm.
interesting too. And then I end up with twins. So I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll have kids. But it wasn't like something that I always talked about that I needed to fulfill me. And now I know for certain they are still my greatest gift. And
Wow.
it's beautiful how they are successful in the outer world. To the world, they look like they've got it together. But
Mhm.
you know that everybody, no matter if they're liked, if they're good looking, if they're popular, everybody struggles. You can't get it through this whole journey of being a person without
Yeah.
struggling at one point or another. So I see them through the lens of a mother. So I see a lot of beauty. I see a lot of soul. I see a lot of kindness. But those are the values and the traits that I really wanted them to have. Are you good to others? Because you
Mhm.
could be an amazing lawyer, because my one daughter wants to be a lawyer, or an amazing singer, and that's the other one's plan.
Mhm.
She's released 3 songs already. But if you're not kind, and if you don't have compassion, empathy, and you can't sit with people when they're in their darkest moments, that matters more to me than
Yeah.
what the world sees as success or defines as success. Success to me is, are you caring and compassionate to you first? And then do
Mhm.
you pass that on to others?
Right. Right. And I think that, like I'm listening and I'm thinking, your daughters, they were given something that, wasn't readily available to you, which is the ability to dream, you know?
Mhm.
And not only are they kind, um, but also that they see this world as an opportunity, as a place for that there's good things, and so I do truly believe that you did exactly what you set out to do, to be the parent that you didn't have, because they've got these big ambitious goals. Like
Mhm.
these aren't typical goals. Like these are coming from girls who see the world as an opportunity. And that's a big deal.
I think it comes from safety. When you
Yeah.
don't operate in fight or flight as a child and you don't have to jockey for your worth,
Yeah.
that allows you to expand and
Hmm.
explore it with the safety of knowing that no matter what happens, my
Yeah.
parents have my back.
There you
And
go.
so, when they were graduating and my one daughter, they do the little thing. And so Julia gets up and they're like, yes, she wants to be a lawyer. And then Joelle didn't go to post-secondary right away. And so she just put that she's going to work. Right. And so after grad, I was like, why didn't you say like your plans of like being a singer? And she's been on big stages and has good shows and making good connections in the industry. And she's like, I never thought of it. I'm like, just whatever. She's like, you know what, I'm just going to do what I want to do, and it shouldn't be broadcast to everybody what my big plans are, because lots of us ask those teenagers, and everybody's moving into graduation season, where are you going to school, what are you going to do? Well, at
Mm.
18, I can tell you, I went to school and I told my kids this. I was like, I went to school and I shouldn't have. And I also listened to what everybody else said. I wanted to go into
Yeah.
broadcasting, and I was told you will be far up north or far away. So
Hmm.
that's not a good plan. So, okay, I got into broadcasting school, didn't go. Then I was like, I want to be a social worker and help kids like me. Well, that's going to be super depressing, I was told. So don't do that.
Right.
So again, I looked to the world to give me the answers. And the one thing that we both did as parents of kids that wanted to explore what they wanted to do, when Joelle said, I'm not going to school right away, I need some time, that's fine. Totally fine. We didn't buy into you'll never go back if they don't go within, right after high school and all of the external world chatter. And then the other one saying, I want to be a lawyer, and me saying, okay, what is the purpose of that? What do you want to get from that? And it was like, I want to help victims have a voice who were assaulted, women, men who have experienced violent crimes against their body. And I feel like I can make a difference. I'm like, okay, that is good.
Beautiful.
If you're not there to make a whole pile of money, which she probably will do just fine at, but I
Hmm.
needed her to find her own purpose to that, because if it's not tied to that, like I would have excelled in radio and I would have excelled as a social worker because those were tied to my purpose. But then I moved into careers that weren't chosen, like they were chosen for me, not by me. So I didn't want
Okay.
to limit the girls. And that is the expansiveness. You know, my daughter's moving to Vancouver to go to music school at SAE, and she will be doing sound engineering so she can produce her own music and other people's music. And I'm like, you're going to be 2 provinces away from me. And we're a very tight knit family. We see each other
Right.
probably every weekend. And I'm like, okay, you got to fly. It's going to break. I would break my own heart so you can choose your dreams over what I want for you. And all I want for you is happiness. So if that's what you want to go, we've always said to the kids, Dad and I were 100% portable. You know, we can make it to where you are, wherever you land.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love
I don't
that.
want them to limit where they go in life based on geography.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So supportive. I'm sure that at all the different ways that all the different things that you went through and all of the experiences have informed the type of mother that you've become. And I'm sure and you should be so proud of all the work that you're doing. I
Thank
want to
you.
begin to bring this full circle. I'm curious about um, somebody going through an experience of illness is really the mental illness, all of these different things. Somebody in your position at say 25 years old, what might be something that you would tell yourself or them in that position that can help them to bring you to this really solid, very aware person that you've become?
That's a really good question. I would say there's a couple things. So when my sister was dying, my brother sent me a song. I can't remember who sang it, but every storm runs out of rain.
Mm.
And it's kind of like the age old adage that this too shall pass. You
Mhm.
feel like you are in a tornado and you have no control. And it really brings to light what matters.
Mhm.
So if you can anchor in to what matters, like the most beautiful and heartbreaking journey that I went through was when my sister was dying. And it took
Mhm.
3 weeks. And I'll go into detail in that in book 2. But
Mm.
there were moments where I was counting the seconds between her breath, and I could feel that energy of transition moments happening. And I've been trying to get back there ever since, which is weird because it's like that event also had me in grief for a full year where I didn't want to go
Mhm.
downtown. I didn't want to see anybody. I would go to work. I was not the mother that I needed to be for my kids, but I was really devastated. But
Yeah.
it's ironic that at that point in life, I knew that I wanted to get back to that same spot of awareness of, yes, hard times happen, but there is so many lessons. It's that point. I always use this analogy in all my talks. That's when you're being planted.
Mm.
And what does a plant need to survive? What does a seed need to break? It needs water, right?
Mhm.
So that's your tears
Mhm.
and the tears of others that surround you in love and light. It needs light. And you are in darkness because you're underneath the ground. So you let others in and ask for help. Help is the light. And then it needs a rich soil. So that you enrich your soil with learning, listening, learning from podcasts and books, listening to your gut because it generally that gut brain, it's pretty accurate. So I would say anchor into those things, and for some people that comes in the form of faith. For me it comes in the form of meditation. And in some of the meditations, it's so funny because I've got the Calm app and it's wonderful. And I do, a 10-minute or 34-minute meditation. And lately I've been doing them at bed and falling asleep. That's fine. It's been tiring lately. Um, but I've anchored in on some new meditations that take me to that exact feeling that I had when my sister was passing, which is very much a pulsating of the body, an awareness of the energy, and a connectedness with the whole universe. Like, I'm the person that stayed up till 1 in the morning watching the Northern Lights 2 nights in a row. And then I was exhausted the next couple days. But I'm like, that's okay. Because I like to take, like, just even take those moments and stand outside. I bare feet. I believe in grounding energy of the earth and just look up at the universe and realize that we are so much more than our human experience. There is a power and an energy, and your thoughts. What does Joe Dispenza talks about this, about your thoughts and your feelings, and that they're two different things. A thought
Yeah.
will ignite the feeling. And if you can have a good moment in our reality here, it's going to tie it towards this good feeling, and you're going to want more of that. But our nature is the trauma, and when you have those bad feelings, that embeds deeper in the brain. So, like, for every good thing that's said to, a kid, um, for every bad thing, you need 20 good things to replace that, to override the operating system. So if you can start overriding your operating system when you're in fight or flight, that is success beyond any understanding. So I know when Kim was dying, I had an innate knowing that she wants to die, and that's okay. I was in surrender, and it was beautiful. But I watched people around me all try to feed her, all try to coax her into living, and I was like, I never tried. And it wasn't that I didn't love her, and maybe that's what it looked like to the outside world, but I was like, she knows. She's following her internal guidance system because I'm following mine. But I
That's
know when,
right.
like 9 months before, when that had happened, another time, I was desperate for her to live, and I was begging her to live, and she did. But as soon as, because our souls were really connected, as soon as I surrendered, I was like, I'll be okay. I'll be okay. So anchor into those moments of stillness with yourself. Give yourself a little space to do some meditating, maybe in some gratitude. Even on those hard days where I come home and it's like, wow, like we just had a difficult week last week with my husband's health. And I would come home from the hospital because he was in there for about 5 days. And I would come home and I was tired, emotionally, physically exhausted. I would sit with my gratitude journal and find things to be grateful for. The nurses, the doctors, the cleaners, the cooks, like it didn't matter.
Yeah.
There were so many good people that surrounded us during that time. The messages from people, like the love. Let the love in. Let the love in.
I love that. What a great, great piece. And let the love in sounds so much to me like let the light in. With that
Mm.
seed. I love that analogy of the seed. Okay, well, I think that this may be an opportune time to begin to close. Is there anything that you'd like to leave the listeners who have listened to your story or any final thoughts of any kind?
I would say life is going to be full of ups and downs. We're on this roller coaster together. And if we can look at people, this was a big lesson I had to learn because in trauma response, you look at people as doing things to you, right? You're the
Mm,
victim. I was a pretty good victim for a long time. But if you can learn to look at people and their actions and realize that's to do with their own relationship with themselves, that it will change your interactions with people. I mean, I slip up some still. I have those very big emotional reactions, but I always catch myself maybe sometimes after the fact. But it's like if you get curious about why people are doing things that they're doing, like, and you listen, they'll always tell you. They may not tell you directly with like, oh, I'm a big bully and aggressive because my dad was a big bully and aggressive. They may not tell you that, but it's pretty safe to assume that the way that they're acting in the present is a direct result of how they were treated as kids. And that allows compassion in. So now it doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries, It's healthy to set boundaries. I was terrible at that. And I only started setting boundaries, in the last 5 years, 6 years. But once you start setting them, you can do them with love and compassion because you're like, they just simply don't know what they don't know. So, and if you're bringing an energy into the room when you're going to be setting a boundary that's confrontational, even if the words that you say aren't confrontational, they're going to feed off that. They're going to feel that and they're going to be like, whoa. Have you ever walked into a room and you just feel tension or
Oh, yes.
something going on and nobody's talking? What?
Mhm.
And I used to be like, what did I do? And now I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, this is feel this out. This has nothing to do with you. Don't assume everything is about you. Um, and the way that you bring yourself in with that energy. But setting safe boundaries, getting curious about why people are the way they are, and learning that you get to set your baseline of energy. So if you walk in, there was a coworker I had, and if she didn't say hello to me in the morning, I remember distinctly feeling like, okay, it's going to be one of those days. It's going to be a bad day. She's angry.
Mm.
She's ticked. And then I just remember one day she came in, she didn't say hi to me. I turned around back to my computer and I sat down. And I said, I am not going to let her energy define me today. And then from there on, I learned to walk in my own shoes instead of trying to chase after her approval because some people aren't going to give you the approval. You need to give you the approval to be who you are. So, yeah,
Wow. Wow. So well said. So well said. Well, thank you so much, Jana, for being on the podcast, for telling your story so vulnerably, for letting us in on what's happening in your life now. I'm so grateful to have had you and to have this conversation.
it was really nice to be here. It's been great to meet you. And I look forward to listening to all your podcasts. And I really, truly appreciate the energy that you bring to this podcast and that you're doing this to help people. That's just beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Now, where can people find your book?
You can go on Amazon. It's in a lot of the local Indigo bookstores. They've got a little special section that is local interest. Um, yeah, you can order it directly from me. I have a few hundred copies on hand right now. Yeah, it's been a great journey, and it's where I feel like I can be the most impactful, not only to the people who read it, but it's really impacted me to be able to do my life's work, which I've known since I was like 19 I was supposed to do this. So it's really
Beautiful.
great to walk in authentic shoes.
Amazing. I will link all that in the comments. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.